Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for September 4th, 2025. Today we're going to be taking up a very controversial question, but one which has to be addressed if we're going to actually move into an era of peace, which is, who are the real anti-Semites? Now, there are new polls and commentary coming out in the United States which show that there's a decisive shift away from support of Netanyahu's policy of genocide and war crimes, and the opposition to the commitment of his extremist regime to remove Palestinians from Palestine. Now, after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, there's overwhelming support internationally for a military campaign against Hamas. This was the case in Israel and Europe and in the United States. But now, nearly 2 years later, this is changing because it's no longer a campaign against Hamas, or it also is showing, as the Israeli Defense Forces now admit, that they're not going to be able to wipe out Hamas. Instead, it's become a campaign to drive the Palestinian people out of Palestine. Ethnic cleansing, which is a war crime under international law. Now, those people who are marching against this, and there are large demonstrations around the world, hundreds of thousands in some cities in Europe, demonstrations in the United States, 1,000 rabbis in the United States signed a letter calling for aid to the people of Gaza. All of this is being denounced by Netanyahu and his allies as examples of anti-Semitism, the historic blood libel against the Jews. That is, if you oppose the policy of the state of Israel, you're accused of being against Jews. Now, there are still real anti-Semites around, but this is a very small number and can easily be contained. Instead, the argument is being used that if you oppose what Netanyahu is doing, you must be an anti-Semite. Now, the problem with this is that the shift that's underway includes a large segment of the Jewish population opposing what's being done in their name to carry out a destruction of Palestinian life in historic Palestine. And so the loss of support from Jews, especially young Jews, that this is, to call this anti-Semitism is absurd. Are these demonstrations, which include large numbers of Jewish people, are they driven by anti-Semitism, self-hatred? Well, the reality is that despite the censorship, which has blocked the reality of what's being done in Palestine, the proliferation of social media and videos has made it clear to people all over the world that this is not a campaign to destroy a terrorist movement, but to clear the Palestinians out of Israel and out of Palestine. That it's a deliberate campaign of murder against Palestinians, including women, children, and the elderly. You don't achieve peace by murdering children. Now, the best evidence that these are war crimes, genocide, is the statements from the Zionists themselves of their murderous intent. Kill all of them, they say. They are Amalek, in other words, historic enemies of the Jews. The young are not innocent. Starve them. We're seeing the destruction of hospitals, the destruction of schools, the murder of journalists. Now, what is the goal? To force them all to leave. This is the open policy of Netanyahu and his allies, the greater Israel fanatics, such as government officials such as Ben-Gvir, such as Smotrich, Israel Katz, and Netanyahu himself. So as a result, the polls are beginning to reflect a shift as this becomes clear. Now let me cite just two U.S. polls that came out at the end of August. One is the Quinnipiac poll, which shows that now 60% of Americans oppose more military aid to Israel. The second is a poll from Economist YouGov that shows that 84% in the United States support an immediate ceasefire, In other words, no more continuing pretense of a campaign to destroy Hamas, but stopping the killing now. Now, here's the shift. In February 2024, only Bernie Sanders in the Senate voted against the $14.1 billion aid package to Israel. Now, last month, 27 senators voted against the $675 million additional package. In the U.S. House, 22 representatives are co-sponsors of the Block the Bombs Act, with dozens more signing up each day. There's a split in MAGA, the Trump movement, Make America Great Again, with numbers of them saying that this policy of support for Israel is putting Israel first, not America first. Now, this is reflected in a turn against the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is the leading lobby for support for Israel. Now, listen to this. This is interesting. Trump himself told the Daily Caller in an interview on September 1st, he talked about AIPAC. He said, "It's the strongest lobby I've ever seen. They had total control over Congress, and now they don't." That's from Trump, who has so far gone along with what AIPAC has demanded. And of course, the Republicans in Congress and many Democrats in Congress who are recipients of funds from AIPAC have been supporting the Netanyahu government. But that's changing, as reflected by Trump saying that. But here's another example. An August 30th op-ed in the Jerusalem Post. And what it said is that the extremist policy being carried out by the Netanyahu regime is, quote, alienating Israel's lifeline in Washington, unquote. And the author said there's a deeper concern among American Jews. Quote, they worry about their children becoming anti-Zionist. In other words, turning against the doctrine that it's legitimate for a Jewish state to drive out non-Jewish residents. Now, this is going to come up at a UN General Assembly emergency session sometime next week. There's an attempt to activate the Uniting for Peace resolution, which is a way to override the control of the United States of the Security Council, where even though most of the world's nations oppose the Israeli genocide policy, when the UN Security Council takes up resolutions against it, the United States vetoes those resolutions. Well, there is something called the Uniting for Peace Act, which would allow the UN General Assembly to override the Security Council. And that's going to be brought up for a vote sometime in the next week or so. And this is an opportunity for the world to speak with a single voice, not accepting ethnic cleansing, not accepting the murder of people based on religion or race. Now, the fact of the matter is that to support this resolution is not a sign of anti-Semitism, but a reaffirmation of international law, including under the motto, never again. And if the Zionist regime won't commit to a ceasefire and an end to the occupation, then governments must impose harsh sanctions and an end to weapon shipments. But that's not enough. They have to replace the imperial doctrine of geopolitics, of dividing people based on race, religion, ethnicity, which is the historic policy of the empire. You defeat the opposition by dividing them against each other on identity. Well, that has to end. And instead, to pursue policies of mutual benefit. And that includes to return the land seized in the 1967 war by Israel, return that to the Palestinians in return for their pledges of accepting peace. And the Arab League has already agreed to that. It's Israel which has refused to accept that. But then go a step further. We need mutual benefit to incentivize this peace. And that's what Lyndon LaRouche's Oasis plan was designed to do. And the idea was incorporated in Oslo, but was sabotaged, especially with the assassination of Rabin by followers of Netanyahu. So I've included a link in the description section on the Oasis plan. This is the path toward peace, a pursuit of an economic development policy for mutual benefit. And this is also coherent with the motion coming out of the conferences in Asia, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what the BRICS are talking about. That is that we have an emphasis on advancing, using science and technology, the physical economy of all nations to take care of the poor and those who don't have jobs and those who are still victims of colonial policy, to reverse that. That's what the potential is at the UN by taking up this resolution against the policy of the Netanyahu extremist Greater Israel fanatics. This is not about hatred of Jews. It's about reaffirmation of international law and the fundamental beliefs of all great religions. So I urge you to look at these links and to act in support of the fight for the Uniting for Peace resolution at the UN General Assembly. Now, tomorrow will be Friday. I take your questions on Friday, so send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. And I hope to receive a